and welcome back to Pin My Podfics. This will be the reading of After the Fall by innocent_reader. And this is chapter 13, part 1 and 2, or part 1 and 2 of chapter 13, Those Who Remain. Now, this is after my month-long hiatus. Originally might have been 2 months, but got my motivation back after joining a server full of people who also do stuff that I do, like podfics and other stuff. And yeah, so I got my motivation back, and let's get on with the fic. Chapter 13, Those Who Remain, Part 1. The metallic corridor leading to the command room felt endless, each step echoing like the first sound to break months of abandonment. The automatic doors slid open with a slow groan, revealing the heart of the watchtower. Dick was the first to step inside. For a moment, he just stood there, staring. The room was vast, almost disproportionate, with rows of dark consoles and swiveling chairs aligned like silent sentinels. Above them, the massive central screen covered the entire wall, reflecting nothing but its own darkness. On the floor, the emblem of the League could still be seen, faded and worn like the ghost of what it once represented. No voice, no sound, only the faint hum of backup power still keeping parts of the system alive. Wally came in second, and even he, always restless, stopped for a few seconds, eyes darting across the room with something between unease and reverence. Zatanna folded her arms, her posture tense, as if she had just stepped onto sacred ground. Roy scanned the infrastructure with a soldier's eye, as if assessing a battlefield long abandoned. And Midoriya, his eyes just shone with a mix of awe and disbelief. Dick Grayson drew in a slow breath. His gaze locked on the watchtower's control panel. Even with the core systems partially active, the atmosphere was cold, impersonal, far too quiet for what he had always been told was once the vibrant center of this greatest force for justice the world had ever known. He swallowed, the weight of responsibility settling like an anchor in his chest. Around him, the others waited. Wally, leaning on the command table, his eyes lost in the shattered monitor lights. Zatanna, arms wrapped around herself, struggling to stay composed. Roy, arms crossed, impatient. And Midoriya, standing beside Dick, his face filled with silent respect and unguarded admiration. The Japanese boy had never been here before. In truth, none of them had, not even Dick. He had only heard Bruce's stories about the watchtower, about its imposing presence, its symbolism of unity, a satellite suspended above the world. And now, here they stood, without their mentors, without the League, staring at a hollow chamber that echoed not just their footsteps, but absence itself. Midoriya broke the silence, his voice hesitant, but edged with genuine curiosity. "Dick, can I ask you something?" He waited for the leader's eyes before continuing. "If the Batcave can also have communication systems, what makes this different? Why come all the way here?" The group turned to Dick. He exhaled slowly, planting his hands on the panel. "The Batcave had limited access," he explained, his tone steady, though quiet. "I could use Bruce's clearance to scan frequencies, send out bursts of messages, but it was like tossing bottles into the ocean. They might reach someone, or they might not. Wally crossed his arms, thoughtful. And here? Dick nodded. Here, it's different. The watchtower wasn't just built as a base. It was built to be the League's nerve center. His fingers brushed across icons pulsing in red. Every hero ever recognized by the League, even the distant affiliates, their contacts are stored in this system. Zatanna narrowed her eyes, voice low. You mean to say... I mean, the general call doesn't request it. It commands. Dick's jaw tightened. It forces the signal through. If anyone's still alive, they'll hear it. The silence that followed carried a sacred weight. Even Midoriya didn't know the full history of the League. Who didn't know the full history of the League, felt the gravity of it. Roy muttered. And if no one answers? Dick lowered his eyes, Bruce's deep voice echoing in memory. This protocol exists only for when everything else has failed. Then it means we really are alone. Only then did he start the sequence. A soft chime of initialization pulsed through the chamber, like a heart restarting after long silence. The floor vibrated beneath their feet. On the central screen, transmission lines expanded outward like ripples across water, stretching across Earth, crossing continents, oceans, deserts of silence. And Dick could only think one thing. Let them hear us. Let someone answer. General call. Last hope, he thought, as he pressed the final button. The message would spread in waves, just as Bruce had once explained. First, though, through national channels, then international, and then, finally, to the mythical allies. There was no guarantee who was left alive, no certainty who would respond. The silence after the signal was suffocating. The panel displayed a pulsing graph, showing the transmission waves sweeping across the planet, touching continents, seas, the most remote corners of the globe. Each point that signal reached carried both a plea and a summons. We're alive. If you are too, answer. Dick exhaled slowly and stepped back, resting his hands on the edge of the console. His eyes slid towards Wally, whose fingers drummed nervously against the metal surface. Then to Zatanna, who kept her eyes shut, whether in a silent prayer or to simply keep her emotions from spilling over. He couldn't tell. Midoriya edged a little closer and asked, in a voice barely above a whisper, Is this how the League did it? Dick managed a faint smile, unable to tear his gaze from the screens ahead. I never saw it myself, but Bruce used to tell me. He said that whenever the general call was made, it was always the most solemn moment because it meant the world needed them more than ever. Midoriya nodded, swallowing hard. The weight of absence felt heavier now, thick as fog, wrapping around them inside that steel chamber. Seconds dragged like hours. Dick lifted his eyes to the massive central display. Still no response. Zatanna finally opened her eyes and whispered, breaking the silence. They'll answer. The silence that followed was deafening. Blue pulses swept across the console, broadcasting the signal across the globe. But beyond that, nothing. No voices, no reply. Wally's fingers tapped at the table faster, sharper, as though he could hammer a response out of the void. Satana's lips moved silently, prayers without sound. Roy stood statue still, though the tension in his jaw betrayed the effort it took to stay calm. Midoriya clenched his fist so tightly that the knuckles had gone pale. Dick stared at the display, feeling the room close in around him. Even the echo of his own breathing sounded louder than the hum of the machines, and the thought cut through him, cold and merciless. What if there's no one left? What if we really are the last ones? He blinked hard, trying to shake it, but the fear lingered like a shadow he couldn't escape. Just as the weight threatened to crush them, a sharp beep pierced the silence, small, almost insignificant, yet enough to make every single one of them hold their breath at once. One of the monitors lit up, words flashing across the screen. Connection established. North America. It felt like the whole room exhaled together. Dick clenched his fists, took a steadying breath, and looked around at the others. "All right," he said, his voice firm despite the knot in his stomach. As the first flickers of the video began to form on the monitor, Dick strained his back, drew in a deeper breath, and fixed his gaze on the screen, ready to face, one by one, the survivors who remained. And in that moment, despite the fear, despite the grief, something inside him sparked, a fragile thread of hope. Part 1 of Chapter 13, Those Who Remain, finished. Well, done, read, and now on to part 2 of Chapter 13 of Those Who Remain. The first image stabilized slowly on the main screen, as if the system itself, so long unused, hesitated before revealing what was left of the world. A woman appeared. She was in a small apartment, the paint peeling from the walls, a broken window behind her letting in the pale glow of sunset. She wore a suit Dick recognized from old records. Rocket, once the partner of Icon. She drew in a breath before speaking, her voice tired but steady. "This is Rocket, South Dakota. I'm alive. I need instructions." For a moment, no one breathed. The sound of that voice cut through the silence like a flare in the dark. Wally strained in his chair, his heart racing. Satana's hand went instinctively to the pendant at her neck, as if in silent prayer. Roy exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Midoriya's eyes widened, awestruck, as if witnessing a miracle. Dick felt his chest tighten. There were survivors. Before he could answer Rocket, another signal chimed on the console. Connection established. Alan Scott. The screen beside her flickered to life, revealing the aged but resolute face of the very first Green Lantern. Alan sat at an old wooden desk, surrounded by maps and books, as though he had been waiting for this call for days. His gaze was direct, unwavering, and the faint aura from his ring betrayed that, retired or not, he was still ready. "This is Alan Scott, receiving the call, awaiting instructions." Dick swallowed hard, fingers curling against the armrest. Bruce had spoken of him more than once. The first man to wear the lantern's mantle, a pillar of justice from another age. To see him here, steadfast, despite the years, stirred something unexpected in Dick. For a fleeting second, he felt like a boy again, listening to Batman's stories. And then another alert flared across the console. Connection established. Jay Garrick. The parental, steady face of Jay filled another part of the screen. His hair was now completely white beneath the winged helmet, but his eyes still carried the same spark Wally had always described. Jay Garrick, the first Flash. I'm here, and it's good to know there are still others. Wally's hand flew to his mouth, smothering a laugh that broke into something dangerously close to a sob. His eyes blurred instantly, and he turned his head, trying to hide it. For him, it wasn't just another hero of the past. This was family. Barry's family, and now his link to that legacy. Another ping. Connection established. Wildcat. The feed opened to a man with a rugged frame, hands still wrapped in tape, as though he had just walked out of a sparring match. Behind him, an improvised gym littered with battered punching bags. Wildcat, heard the call. I'm in. Roy's arm folded tight, as if to cage something inside. Oliver had spoken of Wildcat often, always with respect, always with that edge of admiration reserved for men who refused to bend. Seeing him here, still standing, was a brutal but powerful reminder. The world could collapse, but some men would never yield. Dick drew a deep breath, his eyes sweeping across the four faces now glowing on the screen. Veterans, survivors. Despite everything the world had lost, they remained. The system pulsed again. Connection established. Latin America. The image resolved into El Dorado. Yet behind him, vivid colors of a city nestled against the rainforest. Yet his expression was solemn, his voice marked with strength. El Dorado, checking in. Times are hard, but I'm alive. He gave a respectful bow of his head. Dick answered with a brief nod, the gesture almost ceremonial. His presence was a reminder that this call was not just American. The world itself was answering, fragmented but still breathing. Moments later, the console lit up once more. Connection established. Europe. Static filled the feed before a gravelly voice rashed through. Constantine, online. A heavy sigh. Somebody, for the love of God, tell me there are cigarettes on this bloody satellite. The image steadied, showing John Constantine, gaunt, eyes ringed with fatigue, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his elbow. Yet, behind the weariness, the same irreverent spark flickered, undimmed. Hey, Wally let out a nervous chuckle, whispering under his breath. He's exactly how Barry describes him. Before Dick could respond, another feed opened beside Constantine's. Connection established. Jason Blood. The man appeared in a room lined with books and arcane symbols. He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Jason Blood, ready to listen. His presence made the air heavier. Zatanna swallowed hard, feeling the familiar weight of the supernatural. It was no longer just a gathering of survivors. It was a reminder that forces beyond humanity itself had answered the call. The next cycle brought another voice. Connection established. Africa. First came the image of Vixen, Behind her was a crowded shelter full of women and children, their curious eyes peering toward the camera, yet her gaze was steady, unwavering. Vixen, East Africa, responding to the call. Almost at the same time, another screen lit up. Impala, standing tall on a hilltop, the sky behind him painted in the colors of sunset. Impala, alive and ready. Dick allowed himself a brief smile. This wasn't just an echo of resistance. It was a cry rising from every corner of the planet. Connection established. Asia. First came rising sun with Mount Fuji looming majestically in the background. He bowed with formal respect. Rising sun, Japan, standing by. Next, Thunderlord appeared, his eyes sharp, his voice deep. Thunderlord, Taiwan, awaiting coordinates. And finally, Katana. Her face was severe yet serene, with ancient symbols etched behind her. Katana, listening. I bring word from Oceania. Tasmanian devil is alive, but isolated. Zatanna drew in a deep breath. Even she, who lived among the impossible, seemed shaken by the sheer scope of what they were witnessing. Each new voice, each new face, reinforced the same thought pounding in all their minds. They were not alone. Then came the final signals. The console flickered with intensity, as though the system itself strained to reach the next frequencies. Connection established. Mythic realms. The screen revealed the crystalline spires of Atlantis, columns of coral lit with a bluish glow that shimmered in the clear water surrounding the throne. At its center, regal and unyielding, stood Queen Mera. Silence fell instantly. Even in their breathing seemed to hold still. Atlantis answers. Her voice was clear, commanding, like a current that could not be stopped. The Queen stands with you. Every syllable carried power. Her gaze didn't just convey presence, it conveyed promise, a vow of support, a battle of a sea that would not remain idle as the surface world fell. Zatanna let out a sigh that seemed to carry weeks of tension, relieved to know the kingdom beneath the waves still endured. Before they could fully absorb it, another screen flared to life. Connection established. Themyscira. Torchlight danced across white and gold marbles. Upon the central throne sat Queen Hippolyta, I don't know how to pronounce that, clad in ceremonial armor. Her purple mantle draped across the steps, her expression regal yet unyielding. She raised her chin, and her voice rang out like an ancient decree, echoing beyond the tower's walls. Themyscira stands ready. Where shadows gather, our swords will shine. The declaration silenced even their thoughts. Roy turned his eyes away, unsettled by the weight of her presence. Wally swallowed hard, visibly shaken, and Midoriya, though unfamiliar with the legend in full, felt a shiver trace down his spine. Dick looked at all the faces now gathered on the screen. Survivors, veterans, magicians, kings, and queens. Each image was a spark, fragile one, but together, a firestorm. And in that moment, he understood. This was not just a call for survival, it was the rebirth of something greater. He glanced around at Wally, whose smile was wet with tears, at Roy, brushing his eyes discreetly at Zatanna, radiating both relief and strength, and at Midoriya, fists clenched, absorbing every detail. Dick leaned forward, activating the general channel. This is Robin. To what remains of the resistance. We are alive and we will fight. The images lingered on the screen, like portraits of a gallery celebrating what's still injured. And for the first time since they had entered the watchtower, Dick felt it deep in his chest. They were no longer alone. And that's it for part 1 and 2 of chapter 13, Those Who Remain. If you hear any background noise, that's just my other stuff, and also my neighbors, who I don't know why, but they're making some random noises. And also, fun fact: did you know that ceremonial armor are usually painted or use gold, which because gold is pretty heavy, and they also always have high heels. Remember remember that. And that's it for this chapter. Check out the author innocent underscore reader, and I also thank you to innocent underscore reader for now letting me podfic your whole series of the Knights of Tomorrow. I will be slowly getting to the third volume of your series, but it's gonna take a while. School exists. So yeah, this is of course still ongoing, and of course I'm back, and now this is an actual bye. Have a good whatever time of the day, and yeah.